gathering. As you likely know, we have three different matters to share with you today as our pre-convention hearing. We're going to be discussing the proposed budget. We're going to be discussing the work of the Commission on Constitution and Canons, and also the resolutions that have been brought forward at this time. And I think we'll actually do that in the reverse order from which it was presented, just knowing that some folks have some obligations on their schedule this afternoon. So we'll begin with the legal matters before we move to the financial. However, as we gather, I'll offer one of the prayers from the Book of Common Prayer for, I'll use the prayer for the diocese. The Lord be with you.
Also,
Let us pray. O God, by your grace, you have called us in this diocese to a goodly fellowship of faith. Bless our clergy, our lay leaders, and all our people. Grant that your word may be truly preached and truly heard, your sacraments faithfully administered and faithfully received. By your Spirit, fashion our lives according to the example of your Son, and grant that we may show the power of your love to all among whom we live, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So just as we are gathering today, I'm just going to double check. Chancellor, are you on this call, and did you want to speak to the resolutions? Or if you are not, then I think we have Father Jeff Kirk, who will speak to the work of Constitution and Canons. All right, I'm going to invite Father Jeff to share the work of the Constitution and Canons Committee. Not seeing either of our legal types, I'm going to ask if there is anyone from either of those committees who would like to speak to the matters. Okay, there's our Chancellor. Thank you, Chancellor.
Certainly. Let me bring up the resolutions report on my,
Bishop French, what section are we on, please?
Father Jeff, the Chancellor is going to take the first part, and we'll call upon you for the next part. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, could I have a screen share, please?
I'll make you a co-host, which should give you the ability to do so.
I'm still being disabled from that.
Try again.
There we go. Okay, can we see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Aha. One more step.
Success.
Success. And then it jumped out of a different screen. Give me one moment.
Oh.
No, that's Constitution and Canons.
Are these reports available online at this point?
They are available online.
Yeah, I'm on a Zoom meeting right now, so.
Okay, I have just lost. One moment, I'll find this.
Chancellor, can I suggest you stop the screen share and start again when you have found the document? Or I might be able to share it if you'd like.
Please, Bishop.
Okay. Do we have that now?
It looks like we do.
Yep.
Okay.
Looks good.
So, preliminary report of the Committee on Resolutions. The deal with the Committee on Resolutions is the committee receives resolution proposals up to a deadline for the convention and puts them into a regular order and has hearings on them, at least one before each convention. And we're having a formal hearing on November 2nd. At that time, we will hopefully have all the proposers in before the committee. Anybody else who is interested in joining in, we will be in the small conference room at Diocesan House. And there will also be a Zoom by registration meeting at the same time. At which time, anybody has any questions about lack of clarity for any of the proposals, they can explain that to the proposers, and the proposers will have an opportunity to clarify their proposals. Following that hearing, the committee will then meet separately and prepare its final report along with the recommendation either for or against, or to make no recommendation for each of the proposals. And if they're recommended for or against by the committee, they will end up on the consent calendar unless removed. So also anything that's not submitted by the deadline, which was, I think, September 30th for this convention, it can be submitted to the convention, but it requires a 2/3 vote for consideration. So the first proposal is 241-1, and it relates to sales of real estate of continuing mission congregations. As is pretty much the case with all mission congregations, any real property that they own is titled in the trustees of church property of the Diocese of New Jersey. There are a couple of them that are titled in trustees of the Episcopal Fund, but it's primarily the trustees of church property. And there's also the trustees of church property also get closed congregations, either extinct or closed missions. And when they sell them, there is provision for having for closed churches to go into the Mission Renewal Fund. But for continuing ones, typically the congregation, when they seek to sell, typically this will be like a rectory they're no longer using for that mission, they have to get the consent of the Bishop and Standing Committee. And part of the process for getting the consent of the Standing Committee is to say, what are they planning on doing with the proceeds of sale? So if there is not, if there's a mortgage taken back by the trustees when they're sold, then typically what happens is that in the absence of an agreement by the congregation, they'll get the proceeds of the mortgage as it's paid in the amortization payments monthly. If it is not, and they have not made a plan for the Standing Committee, then this resolution would give to the trustees of church property the discretion to have a plan for parceling out the proceeds of sale if it's a lump sum, so that it can not just dump this in the lap of the mission, but can make an arrangement for how it can be used by them over time. And so that the congregation has not submitted a plan, then they should, in their judgment. And obviously, this is designed to promote the common call and mission for each of the congregations, which we have in Canon 47 of the diocese. And there's a statement in support for that, which talks about basically what I just said, and that the real estate memorandum asks to identify what will be done with proceeds of sale. And if the mortgage is taken back, they get the mortgage payments. And so this gives you the text of Canon 47, Section 1, talked about the expectations of mission for congregations. Oh, you also notice that rather than being designated as 2024-1, that was 241-1, just because we have two conventions happening in 2024. So we're changing the numbering scheme for resolutions to use the annual convention number. 241-2 is a proposal from Angela Cipolla, urging that congregations opt in to become subject to unemployment compensation and temporary disability benefits law. As it is, because congregations are religious entities and therefore they are statutorily exempt from having to cover their employees by unemployment compensation, they can still opt in to have them covered. That way, if you have employees of your congregation that are laid off, if they had paid into the system, they would be able to get unemployment benefits. Otherwise, they are not. And so this is saying proper care and stewardship of those people who employ, that urging people to opt in. Some questions have been raised about what does it cost, and I don't have an answer for that, but we might have one between now and convention as an example of what kind of cost frames we're talking about here. and there's a statement. Report that
Excuse me,
explains that.
Paul, are you taking questions at the end or as we go along?
I will take questions at the end, and I think this is basically at the end because that was the question. So yes,
Yeah, I had a question about the previous resolution, and with regard to the real estate that churches have, that they, that those funds can be redistributed for the diocese. I just wondered if there was any resources being given or any support being given to these congregations to help them with such a plan, or are they being left on their own? And the reason why I'm saying that is many times congregations may have lost their buildings, but sometimes the community is still together, or they may want some of those funds dispersed to outreach programs. So is there any, in this resolution, is there any thought of giving resources to these congregations to support them in putting together a plan? Because as we know, during this time of getting rid of your real estate, it's a traumatic time for congregations. And so I would like to see them get support to submit a plan for their proceeds.
well, that's not something that's part of this resolution, but it is part of the process because all sales of real estate throughout the Episcopal Church have to have the approval of the bishop and standing committee. The standing committee every year designates a person as the real estate liaison, and congregations can interface with that person and get guidance from them. And the current one is Paul Wolfgang, who's quite experienced in all of these things, who's also a member of the trustees of church property. And so the point at which the congregations will get guidance is when they're negotiating with the standing committee, because my own congregation many years ago went to go to the standing committee for permission to sell a second rectory that we had on another part of town that somebody had given us, and we had to negotiate with the standing committee as to what it would take for them to give their permission and how we would deal with the proceeds and a whole bunch of things like that. And so that's the stage in which the guidance comes in. And
so if there is guidance, then why would there not be a plan?
Correct.
Could I just add a couple of things to this? This is intended to ensure that congregations have full and appropriate access to their funds. It's not intended to withdraw their funds. We have several transactions currently either recently concluded or close to conclusion where the previous work towards them did not include a plan for the dispersal of the funds. I can't think of any situation where a congregation would be selling property and that would not be something that not only the standing committee, but also the bishop and bishop staff would be aware of and supported as needed. Really, this is not intended as a way of removing authority from the congregation. It's intended to create a clear process so that we can acknowledge the authority the congregation does have over their resources and follow through in a logical course. If we wind up with transactions happening without having done this preparatory work, and that sometimes transactions take years, we might discover at the end of it that no one has any idea what the plan was with the money, or the needs for the original plan is no longer the current doesn't address the current need, and so this gives us as a starting place for the conversation. Does that help at all? It's not about putting more controls or taking away from. It's about ensuring that we've attended to the need to be in conversation so that congregations can have access to and use their resources as they need.
Yeah, it answers part of it, but as you can understand my concern that, proceeds from closed congregation, that congregation has, authority over those funds. So I am just wanting to make sure that is not being taken away in this process. Mm-hmm.
It's not intended
to be a conversation.
Yeah, it does require a conversation, and it is not intended to be removed as long as it is subject to the canonical structure of the Episcopal Church. And so that means that, property is held in trust in a variety of different ways. We aren't intending to change that, but we do acknowledge and want to be supportive of the work of our congregations and their need to be active agents in the dispersal of their properties.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, the reason I'm speaking, I cannot find a raise hand button. So if there's one, I just didn't see it. So,
It
Pardon
should
my-
be down in the bottom row, but it might be hard to see.
I don't see it. So, oh, I see it. I see it now. React. All right. I think I found it. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Speaking works too, though, so thank you.
Any other questions? In any case, I will turn the meeting back over to the bishop.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. I appreciate the work that you and the commission have done on that. It's an important matter, and it's one that every year we bring forward these matters, and we want to make sure people understand what we're discussing and why we're raising them. Seeing no further questions for our Chancellor, I'm going to turn to Father Jeff Kirk and ask him to address the resolutions portion of our meeting.
Okay, thank you, Bishop. I hope you all have access to the written copies of the various resolutions. And let me switch my monitor here a little bit. I don't do that.
Ken and Valerie, do you have access to share that? That might be helpful.
Yeah, that would be great if you do.
I can if I have ability to share.
Let me double check your status, but we will make sure you have that. Okay, you should now be able to share, and that will allow us to walk through. Thank you.
Mhm.
Why are you barking? Why are you barking?
Thank you, Valerie. Wonderful.
I think you need document 3 instead of 4A.
Sorry, thank you.
Exactly.
No, please.
Just checking, which document are you looking for, Father Jeff?
Sorry
Father-
about that. They're mislabeled up on the website, so I've got the right one now.
Oh,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. It's number 3.
Okay. 241-1.
There we go.
2.
Thank you. I've had some difficulties this week with my printer, so bear with me, but I can read it certainly on the computer itself. Okay, so first part has to do with changes to diocesan canons resulting from the General Convention, 80th General Convention. All right. Part 1. And your first item is Canon 4, Part 2, or Title 4, Part 2. I'm sorry, that's title, not canon. All right, and you have there the basic provisions of that title have to do with the standing committee and the bishop's role and having appointments to the intake officers. I think it's pretty clear from the wording. Did anybody have questions about it? And there you see it. The bishop diocesan, with the advice and consent of the standing committee, may appoint one or more additional intake officers to serve until the next annual meeting of the convention. There's some additional wording here for that. The reference panel or the church attorney may appoint one or more investigators to serve for the duration of a particular investigation.
These
Are there any
matters
questions?
simply, if I could just interrupt briefly, these matters simply pertain to the clergy disciplinary process that we have. It allows us to appoint an additional it allows us to appoint investigators a little bit differently, which allows for less involvement of the bishop and more of the reference panel. And it allows us to appoint additional intake officers as needed. It creates a bit more, it broadens the process in a way, and it creates opportunities for us to share some of the work more appropriately. It's canonically consistent with the work of General Convention, and it just gives us a little bit more flexibility there.
Okay, thank you, Bishop, for helping with that. Okay, so then part 2 is again from the Constitution, Article 10, deputies and alternates to the General Convention. And this, I think, is clear. We've talked about this at convention a couple of different times, and the changes are necessitated by our moving our convention date to November rather than the spring. That's part of the reasoning for the change. Are there questions or comments about this? Are you ready to move on? Okay, I think that's quite clear and works very nicely. Part 3 deals with Canon 5, Section 7, ballots at in diocesan convention. And the implementing resolution, Secretary shall distribute a list of all nominees received to all members of convention no later than 30 days before the convention meeting. The ballot shall be prepared on which shall be printed the names of the nominees, etc.
The issue here is that with electronic voting, we no longer write in names. It's just this catches the language of our canons up to date with our technology.
That's helpful. Thank you. Any other comments about that? All right. Part 4 then is Canon 10, Diocesan Youth Council. And it's a revision of that canon.
Here, the change simply acknowledges the difference in titles. We no longer have a director of youth ministry or the co-chairs of the youth council. Our system is structured a little bit differently. Those words have been replaced with a member of diocesan staff with responsibility for youth ministry, which is a broader term to allow for the same role to take place. It's the exact same end result, but it means we don't have to worry about people's job titles relative to their responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. All right, part 5, Canon 13, sections 9 and 12, the Mission Renewal Fund. You'll see here one section changes to make sure we stay in accord in Canon 9, section 9, I'm sorry, with section 12 of the canon. Otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward.
I think we have a question from Canon Annette.
Oh,
Yes.
go ahead, Annette.
Yes, again, this is with regard to the disbursement of property and what agency congregations have. We have a standing resolution that says any closure of historically Black congregations ought to be put in a separate fund and used for Black ministries. And this change to the canon to me sort of overshadows that. And I just wondered if there was a provision whereby those funds from churches would be designated separately for use for those ministries.
That is an excellent point. It was not intended to overshadow that in any way. It was intended simply to provide us with the ability to put the funds of the diocese of the congregations to work appropriately. Continuing to to ensure that funds from closed historically Black churches are used for the benefit of Black ministries would be an appropriate, I think, a friendly amendment to what might be proposed. I would encourage, I will follow up with folks from the committee and with the chancellor to see if there's a way that we can reflect that, or if the chancellor has any advice and recommendation in regards to how I know that with a pre-existing a canon or a resolution, we would not want to, we don't want to undermine something. And if this accidentally does that, then we will take steps to ensure it does not. That was never the intention. Thank you for making us aware of that. Chancellor Ambos, if you are still on the call, and I know you had other things you needed to attend to, and if you have anything to contribute to that, you would be most welcome.
The mission renewal fund is continuing. The question is to the extent that there may be other diocesan priorities to bring those into account in dealing with what the trustees should do with such closed congregation sales. And that was the request of Bishop French, to be able to have that consideration being part of that discussion.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is that we have a very narrowly defined process. Actually, it may in itself, I don't know the date of the two different resolutions or processes, but we have a narrowly defined process that tells us we can only do one thing with money from sold properties. Given our financial realities, we'd like to be able to do other things, including replenishing funds. But at no point in the conversation were we intentionally seeking to remove the agency of our historically Black congregations and the ways that those funds should benefit the historically Black continuing congregations. I would be both, again, most open to ensuring that there's language that reflects that, and also perhaps to reviewing the dates in which the changes were proposed, because it may be that the current situation may also override the stated intention. That's not our goal or plan. So appreciate your naming it. We can take a look at this going forward and make sure that there's something in there that allows for that regard for other commitments made. Would that be
Thank you.
an appropriate resolution?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is part 6, Canon 18, the Audit Committee. And essentially what they're doing here, or we're doing, is simplifying Diocesan Canon 18. You can see the strikeouts, strike-throughs, and the other items here.
We've been doing quite a lot of work in the area of audits, and the audit committee has been doing heroic work in terms of getting us caught up with things that were overdue and outstanding. And we recognized when reviewing the list, both of their responsibilities and of the membership, that it was not entirely clear, and some of the scope of the committee was much too large beyond what they felt was comfortable, and some of it was not clearly defined well enough to give them the agency that they need to work. This tidies up the canon and makes it an appropriate reflection of the needs, the responsibilities, and the concerns for today, while also providing us with at least the beginnings of a process that should make it easier in the future for us to do the audit work we are called to do as a diocese.
Thank you, Bishop. I see that also in the Board of Missions at times with our smaller congregations having some challenges to get an audit even done. And if there are things we can do to facilitate that, I think it would be a very wise thing. Okay. Part 7, Canon 23, Administrative Assistance for the Bishop. Clarifying some things, which I think is very helpful. The tenure of office, for one thing, the consultation with the standing committee is mentioned as well, and some things have been eliminated that were no longer felt to be necessary.
It's a continuation of the tidying up work we began in the spring at our most recent convention. We are eliminating one additional use of a term of a term. We also want to acknowledge that the 6 months notice by the bishop, 6 months notice by the bishop for the ending of a tenure of office is challenging if there's a situation where someone is their term ends for cause or for other reasons that may not be predictable in that way. So instead, we replace that with consultation with the standing committee to ensure that there are additional voices in the conversation. Really, this is intended, again, to tidy up the administrative processes and to deal with some inconsistencies in our canons.
Okay, thank you, Bishop. Any other comments? Next item is item part 8, Canon 30, Section 6, election of convocation deans and secretaries. I think this is just helpful to clarify what we do and why we do it and how we do it.
It also clarifies to allow that deacons can serve in the capacity of appointing. They cannot be appointed as deans of convocations because the Episcopal Church canons require that it state that our canons require it to be a member in charge of a congregation, and the Episcopal Church canons named deacons cannot be members, cannot be in charge of a congregation. So it opens opportunities when canonically possible in our denomination. And clarifies the nomination process.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Then part 9 is Canon 35 regarding the church pension fund. And I think it was very helpful, Bishop, what you proposed here, that we essentially delegate that functioning to a member of diocesan staff to at least keep us apprised of things as they come along. And of course, the parishes and missions have obligations as well.
Thank you. This essentially reflects our current practice where our staff are responsible for these functions to begin with. And so it phases out some redundancy and allows us to continue the work effectively and faithfully to support our congregations and our clergy and lay staff.
Okay. And now we turn to item part 10, Canon 61, persons repelled from the Holy Communion. Bishop, do you want to speak to this?
Thank you. This is simply a small amendment to the protocol. This happens remarkably rarely, but should it happen, then there is the provision of the creation of a commission of inquiry. In the past, it has been one priest, one presbyter, and 2 laypersons. This instead allows for a committee of 1 presbyter and 2 other persons, clergy or lay, which would allow for the addition of deacons who were excluded from the previous conversation and also a little bit more flexibility in forming the committee. Again, it doesn't make a substantial change to the process. It simply opens it up somewhat to allow for the full inclusion of members of the church in the conversation.
Okay. Part 11, Canon 74, minimum compensation for clergy.
Again, we're doing a little bit of work of cleanup on things. For example, one part of our canon states that the congregation shall provide an automobile for the use of the clergy. I don't think that that's the case really anywhere right now for congregations providing cars. There's also some other changes proposed in this that simplify and support and address even situations where clergy are compensated in other ways for work. For example, clergy who may not receive a stipend, but who are given housing instead for very, very, very part-time appointments or assignments. So this, again, clears up and allows for us to have a little bit more flexibility in the compensation area for clergy.
Mm-hmm. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Bishop. I think that does bring it up to a much more ordinary and current practice. Let's put it that way. Current practice. Okay, that's it. I've completed my part of the report.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional questions on the resolutions? Okay, well, thank you for that. At this point, Ken and Valerie, thank you for the screen share. That was most helpful. The final item after the two different legal areas on our agenda is the administrative part of the diocesan budget, and I'm going to ask our diocesan treasurer, Mr. Jonathan Gloucester, if he would address that for us.
Let me go back to sharing the right screen. I had it up there a second ago.
Just so folks are aware, as our treasurer finds that, we are still working on the very final details of the budget. As you can imagine, with the change in convention time, we have a lot less time to put a budget together. The Finance and Budget Committee has done amazing work, but we're still finalizing some of the numbers and making sure that we have them accurately. When that happens, it will be available on the website, but until then, there's a little more work to do.
Yes, thank you, Bishop French. Yes, so as I present this budget, this was what was presented last week to Diocesan Council for their review and approval. Was as Bishop French stated, Finance and Budget Committee is still reviewing some changes to the overall budget based on some things that came up over the last week. We plan on meeting later this week, probably about Wednesday or Thursday this week, and making some slight revisions to the budget. Right now, it looks like the changes will result in the total budget number being very close to the number, the final number presented here, or a little bit less. So we're reviewing a couple of updates that have come in recently on that. So you may see some updates that are slightly different from the numbers presented here today. Starting with the revenue side of the budget, we'll look at March Mission giving income. This year, we're projecting a budget of a little more than $3 million. How we got to that number is we've got responses by a little more than half of the congregation so far, and the trends are showing that many of them are meeting their asking, or at least increasing it somewhat and getting close to 10%. Based on that, we looked at what congregation we didn't get responses from yet, looking at what they gave last year, and doing some projections on whether or not there may be some increases on any of those. So based on that analysis, we're looking at now March Mission income of about $3,016,983. So far in 2024, we actually are a little bit ahead of where we were in past years and what's actually been giving. So we're hoping that trend continues, where we'll see some increased in March Mission giving for 2025. So that's why we came up with a higher number for our March Mission giving in the 2025 budget. Other areas of income, trust income and designated funds, those are projected based on basically dividends and interest that we're projecting in terms of line 2 from the trust funds. We have a few less shares than we've had in years past, so the dividends on the number of shares that we would get dividends from has gone down a little bit, so we're projecting a small decrease in that. Line 6, trustee grant ministry support, that's actually simply the difference between the income on those first 3 lines and what the expenses are. So I'll go through the expenses, and that's basically that delta is how we came up with the $419,204 for trustee grant ministry support, which you'll see is less than what we had for 2024. It was $734,937. So we're projecting a decrease of about $300,000 in the drawdowns we would have from the trustees based on changes in our expenses for 2025. Going to the expense side, I'll start with the first line. The budget for mission congregations presented by the Board of Missions is $375. That was presented to Diocesan Council back in September and approved in September. You'll see that is a decrease of about $100,000 for mission congregation support in 2024. The second line is the Diocese of New Jersey support to the Episcopal Church, the National Church. In our budget last year, we put in $300,000. The asking was $600,000. We went to the Episcopal Church. They did come back and only approved a reduction to $400,000. So in 2024, we actually are going to be paying $400,000 in Episcopal Church support. But for 2025, we're proposing a budget of $500,000. We're projecting that asking to be about $620,000. So it's still a decrease from the full asking, but we're moving up significantly where we had initially budgeted for 2024. Going down to the next area of budget and diocesan priorities, most of the social and ethnic ministries, many of those are the same. You'll see the first couple very close to the same or slight reduction. The first one where there is a reduction is global development goals. That budget in 2024 was $15,000, and we're proposing a budget of $10,000 for 2025. Most of that is spent on matching grants to congregations, so they would have less available for matching grants. Trinity Cathedral support at this time is about the same. We might be a small adjustment to that amount when we finalize the budget, but we came in last week with very close to that 150 number. The other area where there's a significant change, and it looks like it's a big increase, but it's in diocese communication. We went from a budget of $24,200 to $40,000. In reality, the total amount spent on communications, as you'll see when I get down to staffing, is a lot less than it was budgeted in 2024. We have increased the budget to $40,000 in the Diocese Communications program line because we project spending some money to bring in outside consultants to do some of the technical work on our communication avenues around the website or changes or upgrades, rather than having a full-time staff on board to support that. We're going to actually be using contract support when needed. So we've increased that budget in that program line item to $40,000 for 2025. And other areas, archival expenses about the same. A reduction from Episcopal Church women to 750 from the 1,600. And finding some budget and reviewing that ministry, noticed that their main program activities are virtually or online now. So a significant amount of those expenses they've had in the past, we think that could be covered by the budget of 750 we're proposing. The Reparations Commission proposed a reduction in the 2024 budget, but we think it's still sufficient to carry on that mission, and it would be still in line with what's actually spent in 2024. And the other Commission on Black Ministry, no changes in that area. Another area where there's a change in budget, a reduction, is on youth activities. Went from 30,000 to 15,250. Main rationale behind that reduction is that the budget set aside grants for each convocation, and over the last several years there's been minimal spending in that area. But we reduced by about $8,000 what was spent on grants at the convocation level, so that we're now down. The budget is that 15,250. It still would be more than what the projected expenses will be for 2024 and have been in the past for youth activities. But we basically decided to have a more realistic budget of what's actually feasible to be spent in 2025. No change in the young adult ministry budget. Next area, congregational development and pastoral responses. Those will stay the same from 2024 to 2025. And congregational ministries, again, most of those will stay the same as they were between 2024 and 2025. Going down to ministry development, this is where there's a significant change in the Committee on the Priesthood. Budget was 31,750, and it's now down to 10,000. It's mainly a change in the way we're providing that support for the priesthood. Some of the fees are being paid by the applicants themselves in terms of background checks and other things, so that the expenses budgeted on that, we don't project that. And there are just some other changes in the way that program is being administered that results in a savings in what was projected to be budgeted. So we've got the budget down to 10,000. Again, we think that should be sufficient to what the current activities are in the Committee on the Priesthood. Other areas in this part of priest development, about the same. A slight reduction in Fresh Start. That's for new ministry. New ministry started when a new minister is called to a congregation. That's where Fresh Start comes in, provides some support, and then a slight reduction in transition ministry support. Next area of ministry development is in the Deacons School of Ministry. Significant change in what was budgeted for 2024, which was at 37,200. It's down to 9,000. A lot of that is basically the change in the way that program is being administered now. Some of the staff support has been reduced now that we have a canon for vocations who's taken over a lot of the administrative management of the school of ministry. Also, they've changed the way they actually offer the classes in partnership with the Diocese of Pennsylvania, so that the reduction, there's been a significant reduction in the cost related to classroom instruction for that particular school of ministry activity. And next, the Committee on the Deaconate and Deacons Council, slight reductions in those two areas for the 2025 budget. Going down to our next level of the budget, next area of the budget is things within the diocese for diocesan gatherings. Convention budget, we put that at 10,000. We only have one convention scheduled in 2025, and the 10,000 we think is sufficient to cover based on historical expenses and in-person conventions over the last couple of years. Again, slight reduction in clergy conference, but lay leaders conference about the same. On the larger church, we've been accruing funds for Lambeth Conference over the last few years. Not sure exactly when the next Lambeth Conference will be, but we've been procuring some funds along that level. That's an area when I say we make some slight tweaks, we might make some changes there. House of Bishops budget and College of Bishops, the same as it was in 2025. And General Convention accrual is, we've got it at 30,000. We have budgeted. Budget and Finance will still be looking at that number over the next week or so to determine if that's an accurate number for accrual for the next General Convention, which our Chancellor told me this morning is going to be in Arizona. So we'll be looking at appropriate cost budget amounts to cover the next General Convention. Going down the next area, Program of Covenants, Ecumenism, and Companion. And Program of Covenants and Ecumenism will be the same. Companion Diocesan budget, it was budgeted at 9,500 in 2024. We've reduced that down to 5,000. Part of that is the travel component on that has become more difficult to travel in our companion diocese, and also the way they administer grants and support. Given our conditions here in our diocese in New Jersey, we've reduced that down to 5,000 from 9,500, and a slight reduction in the Episcopal Mental Spiritual Health Ministry. Mainly, again, that's changing. They're changing the way they actually conduct that ministry, but the $500 would be sufficient to support some of the work they've been doing over the last year in terms of material on the website, on their website. I'm going to pause here before I get into diocese staff to see if there are any questions so far on these expenses that are mentioned in the proposed budget.
Yes, I am extremely concerned about the $100,000 reduction for the mission congregations. those are our most vulnerable congregations, and to think that as we look at congregational sustainability and as a priority in this diocese, for us to make such a drastic reduction is of concern. So I'd like you to speak to that, speak to how you think that those congregations will fill that gap, and for the next year.
Yeah, I know that the Board of Missions did have very extensive discussions with the mission congregations. They each had their proposal and grants, and there are some reductions that were given in that area. We looked at also other areas that support could be provided for those mission congregations, but I think a lot of it was around the viability of congregations and making sure they spend the most money in the most effective way. For the Board of Missions in there. I don't think the chair of the Board of Missions is on this call now, but that was the amount presented through Board of Missions. We do realize it is a reduction over what they've had over the last few years. And there will be
Major,
challenges
third.
in some areas, and other congregations will have to work hard to find ways to make up those direct mission
Can I
support.
speak to that as well briefly, because I was part of the conversations with the Board of Missions. It is a reduction in some areas. I want you to know, though, that in some areas, some of our congregations requested less funding, which is actually wonderful news. It was done partly in response to the recognition that we have spent money in various areas that we weren't anticipating, and so the funds are less available. But it was also in several congregation situations. It was a reflection of growth and vitality that we are seeing on the ground in some of our churches right now. So the reduction isn't entirely us coming in. Well, it wasn't ever us coming in and saying, well, we're just not going to give you this. It was carefully, faithfully and thoughtfully engaged conversations with congregations. Some congregations, again, were not even in the conversation this year because they chose not to put in an application at all. Other congregations who put applications in did decrease the amount of their application, and so that was easy to respond to. I'm just going into my inbox right now. I hadn't quite anticipated the conversation around the specifics of the Board of Missions requests, but I'm happy to take a look at what is in. I had an email just last week, and there may be people from the Board of Missions on this call, in which case you're welcome to speak to it as well. However, I just want to affirm that it isn't entirely, a reduction in available funds. The other thing that we are doing as part of the Board of Missions conversation is that we are increasingly intentional about looking at places where discerning how best we can support growth and vitality in different ways. And that doesn't mean numeric growth. It doesn't mean, you have to be getting bigger each year in order to receive money. That's not it at all. However, there are places where we see that when we engage in providing financial support, it goes a long way. And there are other places where sometimes the support we have given has masked congregational decline. So in looking at the numbers, we are committed to having staff, and we have a new congregational support staff member. We are working on bringing in other folks to provide support to some of our congregations in different ways. We're committed to providing the support to the congregations that they need to do the work of discernment and making decisions. And this isn't to say that we're providing support so congregations will close. Please don't hear it that way. But we are providing support so congregations can make faithful decisions about where their energy is and what their ministries are that they might want to focus on. Sometimes it's hard to let go of all the ministries. And if we have fewer resources, that may be a time when we can work with people to set down that which is finished so they can focus on that which is emerging. I really do believe that the way that the Board of Missions worked with the numbers, that was faithful work, it was hard work. And I don't think it's been done in a way that will intentionally harm our most vulnerable congregations. I think it was done intentionally, looking at ways we can affirm and build up and strengthen, and in recognition of the congregations that have less need. One example is we have a number of congregations that have for a long time now received like this much $50,000 of support or thereabouts for the work they do. Their budgets have grown over time, but that 50,000 remains the same. So we've asked them to diminish a little bit in the hopes that they'll be able to take on 5,000 or 7,000 of that 50,000. We're able to sort out our budget with a little bit more flexibility, and they remain larger and they have resources in there that were not accounted for initially. One of the conversations the Board of Missions had was about ways we can use these resources to equip congregations for greater stability down the road. I would love for us not to have to spend any money on congregational support because the congregations are strong and healthy. As it is right now, we want to spend the money on congregational support so that we can get our parishes and our missions, especially our missions through Board of Missions, into a place where they don't need the support that comes from us. And some of that is what you're seeing. I hope that helps. I will.
So Bishop, I am hopeful we will get a more comprehensive report. A 1/3 reduction in a mission congregation budget year over year is significant in this diocese historically. So if we are saying that there are congregations that are not viable, then I think we need to see that in a report. If there are congregations that indeed their income has increased to the point where they don't need mission support, but I am having a difficult time just understanding a 1/3 reduction year over year, especially since I am not aware of any pointed programming that has allowed these congregations to be on such a healthy trajectory. So if one could supplement that line in the budget with data that would support that line, I would appreciate it because it's incredulous to me. So
Okay. So first of all, I want to just push back a little. The difference between last year and this year is not 1/3, it's closer to 20%. It was 475 to 375. So it isn't a third reduction this year. It is closer to 20%. Second of all, the peak numbers we saw were COVID numbers at a time when congregations had a very heightened need for support, and many of our most vulnerable congregations were not eligible for some of the funding support that other less vulnerable congregations received because they didn't have employees in the same way. So they weren't, for example, able to claim PPP. So the peak of the numbers reflects a situation that is no longer fully in place. And third of all, we are actually seeing growth in some of our mission congregations and in some of our recipients of funding. The fourth thing I would say, and this is my final point, is that we actually do have staff who are doing work in new ways now, and we have new staff who are coming in to do more of the congregational support work than we have had in the past. In light of that, the numbers, it wasn't a matter of just sitting there and setting hard numbers and saying, how can we cut? How can we cut? How can we cut? It was a matter of trying to figure out how can we support? What can we do that reflects our current reality and is a gift to the congregations in need? So, yeah. But I'm happy to look at putting together a more detailed than usual report for the Board of Missions information when that is made available as well. Something that perhaps shows a couple of the points you had mentioned. I'll talk to the Board of Missions folks about that.
thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, next I'll go down to diocesan staff area of the budget. First of all, we looked at cost of living increases. We budgeted in a 2.5% increase for staff. That was on board by the middle of the year, say July timeframe. Those are on board in July timeframe would be eligible for that cost of living adjustment. 2.5% is in line with the Social Security cost of living adjustment. That was a basis. So that was a basis for where we see basically increases in current staff line salary levels for 2024. We'll say in the area of bishop salary, this reflects that 2.5% increase. And there were some proposed increases in the professional allowance and the travel, mainly because of professional allowance was to we did sort of even out what professional allowances were between all the staff, and the bishop budget line was less than in the past. So we looked at a potential increase in that area. I will say one of the things that's happened over the last week is the standing committee has looked at a market adjustment in the bishop's salary to bring it more in line with other bishop salaries in the area and other nearby dioceses with similar cost of living standards. Also, I looked at the compensation for Bishop Stokes and worked to bring it online. For Bishop Stokes, some of the compensation was off budget or funded through other areas, so that it didn't show up in our operating budget, but was actually compensation that was actually paid out. So one thing we've done this year is to make it more transparent and say all of the compensation for the bishop salary and housing should be accounted for in the budget. So what we've done in line 606, there was a budget line item for either an assistant bishop or possibly market adjustments of about $40,000. So there's a potential that's where one change would come through in terms of where the money's allocated. But in this budget, we've set aside some money one way or another to bring in some assistant bishop support or an adjustment based on market conditions for the bishop. Well, that's one area of change in the salary. Going down to canon of the ordinary.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can I just
go ahead.
interrupt
You
and
can
speak
go
to
more.
that just a little bit? One of the things we learned several weeks ago was that the compensation that was paid to Bishop Stokes was not fully reflected in our budget, and a very substantial benefit that he received was not offered to me. And I don't think the standing committee was aware of that in the slightest. They were going by the budget. I don't think Bishop Stokes was actually aware of that or of the impact of it. But the reality is that the housing was provided for him and it was not provided for me. And when I asked about that, I was told it was not available. That, together with the standing committee using numbers that were calculated in 2020 to set the compensation, put me very out of alignment with other bishops in the same, what's called a quintile, the category, the size of the diocese and our geographic area, in some really substantial ways. So in reflecting on the 2023 numbers that are now available as opposed to the 2020 numbers, and in recognizing that a very, very substantial number of the bishop's compensation was not available to the diocese and not made public before, the standing committee is making some adjustments there. We'll see that on a document that will likely be available sometime in the next week or so, but we're still doing some number crunching on it. But that's what that is. I'm happy to answer any questions around it. My initial response was surprise and frustration when I found out the difference. And, it doesn't feel very good to discover that your predecessor was compensated substantially different than you are. But at the same time, I'm grateful for the standing committee's faithful and supportive listening and response. And I genuinely believe that it is exactly in keeping with some of the other things we're seeing in our budgets in this diocese. If we look back over time, we had a lot of things that were not included in them that were part of our common life. And we're now starting to be more accountable and to bring things into the alignment that they should be in for that. So I'm happy to answer questions people might have.
Just one question. Are we able to afford the adjustment given the tightness of the budget? I just wondered, and where would that be offset?
So a couple of things. First, with the changes in staffing, our staff reduction is still, we're still going to, even with that, and with a couple of other areas where we have been out of alignment with other dioceses and positions, even with getting not just me, but several other people up to appropriate numbers, we'll still be below this current year's numbers that were budgeted and last year's numbers, because we've done made some real changes in a couple of areas. For example, we no longer have a communications position. Instead, we're going to work with contractors to do the support website and similar. We're working on that. I have a meeting this week around how to move forward there. And we're taking the steps we need to try and consolidate where we can. We're sharing some of our staff positions with congregations, so we receive financially and they benefit from having the staff person available for their use. We are trying to still present a reduced staffing cost for the diocese even with changes, not just for me.
Yeah, in this budget, we're projecting about $100,000 less in staffing in 2025 versus 2024 for total staff costs. So that's where a large portion of the savings is coming, is in other positions that we didn't hire for, and then some that are no longer caring for it in some administrative areas. Any more questions on that part?
Well, this is Nina Dixon. I would like
Yeah.
to commend us for bringing Bishop Sally in line with what we prayed our previous bishop, and I think it would be unethical and probably illegal not to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, this is Ava Foster. So just for my own edification, if it were not in the budget, that compensation for Bishop Stokes, where was it entered? I mean, how did you record it? Where, you know, it's a bit confusing to me that
Yeah.
Of course.
it's saying it's not in the it wasn't in the budget at all.
So
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer. I understand the question. I'm happy to answer it. So Bishop Stokes was provided with housing. And so the diocese purchased and gave him a house for him and his wife to live in. And that same thing, it was calculated as part of his compensation according to the pension plan. So we have a defined benefit plan. And so the housing value was included according to the formula, and he was given pension on a number that is much higher than the number I was given pension on last year or this year. And because of that, when I asked about housing, I asked Canon Phyllis Jones and was told, I asked if my compensation was the same as Bishop Stokes's, and the response was essentially. And I said, what does essentially mean? And I was told that there was something different about how housing was calculated because he was in diocesan provided housing, and I would not be. And one of the reasons for me not being in diocesan provided housing is I have 2 teenagers, and the housing that was provided for Bishop Stokes was not suitable for my family situation. However, as it happens, that was in some of the carrying costs for real estate. The expenses of that were there, that there are a whole bunch of things that don't show up in our budget, and we're still doing work to discover them. The audit committee is finding them, the treasurer is finding them. And so those are places where we have had expenses that would not have been in the line labeled Bishop's compensation, but in fact provided a benefit to Bishop Stokes. And it's certainly when it was appropriate for him to have. It's just that when it wasn't extended to me, it was problematic, and that wasn't intentional on the part of the standing committee. It was because of the chaos in our budget pattern. The other thing that I think is part of that is the way we confirmed it was by verifying the amounts that pension was calculated upon, the pension calculation amounts, the payments to the church pension fund. And what we discovered was that if someone had carefully gone through and done the calculation for every staff position, they would have found a discrepancy in the amounts that reflected the fact that pension was being paid on the housing that was being provided. But that was not, and when I asked about housing, I was told I would have to take a decrease in compensation to receive a benefit. So we can see what happened. It makes sense, although it's not a good kind of making sense, but it certainly is not inconsistent with the other numbers. The standing committee was not given that. However, what that meant is that actually Bishop Stokes's compensation was in line with the numbers that the National Church releases for dioceses and bishop compensation in a place of this size, but mine was very much not. And so I'm grateful for the standing committee and for the finance and budget folks and for the trustees for hearing the concerns and responding to them. Does that answer the question?
Not really, but I understand how you're substantiating the adjustment in terms of you being sidelined, comparing his compensation to yours. My question from a reporting standpoint, how are we now going to make that adjustment that is crystal clear and not, because right now I'm seeing mud.
Right, so two things.
Well,
It's gonna, we have to do some revision of the budget when we get the final numbers.
Okay, well, okay.
It'll be in the
well,
line, so you'll see it. It won't be hidden anymore.
yeah, well, yeah.
And the second is, the reason it was hidden in the first place is because we've had off-budget expenses, and real estate was the area in which we've had most of our off-budget expenses. We've been paying for it, we just haven't been showing the diocese.
So there
So,
will,
Yeah.
there will be a clear,
Yes.
Yeah.
addendum.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we'll, in the
The budget.
updates, like I said, that $40,000 number that was in the budget says visiting Bishop support. When the salary and housing is adjusted, it will actually go to the salary and housing line. What happened in the past is the value and the cost of that diocese supplied housing was never recorded anywhere in the budget. So even though we were spending the money, and as we talked earlier, there were a lot of expenses that we had that weren't in the budget and that were going through the operating account. So what we're doing now is the change is we want to be much more clear where those expenses are and then how they're being covered. If they're not covered in operating budget, we'll report where they're covered, some of the back pay with this adjustment and compensation will probably be covered by the Board of Trustees. And I mean, the trustees of church property. So they'll report, in their report, they'll show the amounts that they're picking up in the cost. So the plan going forward is to actually report the expense and what fund it's actually coming from. As I mentioned before, we didn't account for all of the cost of compensation for Bishop Stokes. So that's one of the changes we're doing now. We're going to actually show. So it said salary and housing, it'll be all the costs related to salary and housing, not just portion of that. And we're doing some adjustments in SECA to properly account for the SECA pay adjustments that take place. So, and like we said, the updated budget, that's one reason why we're going to make changes. It won't change the bottom line so much, but it will move the cost around in particular line items to more accurately reflect where they'll be paid out of.
So and going back to the real estate portion of it that you made, that the real estate portion was adjusted into the pension, if I understand that. I mean, doesn't the real estate have an appraisal? So
no, I don't think I was clear. The value of the housing provided to the bishop was considered part of his income for pension purposes. And so it was acknowledged there that he was receiving that benefit, even if it didn't show up in our budget in other ways. The property itself was separately held. We did have the appraisals, we had the documentation, and in fact, it was sold last fall. I point to the pension number simply because it indicates that there was some awareness somewhere, even if it wasn't reflected in our budget, that there was a very substantial difference in compensation.
okay, and one more question, and this is for my own edification and you know, to take out some of the mud out of the water. How long had Bishop Stokes been living in the residence that the value of his compensation was implied as part of the property? I mean, how long was this? Because I'm saying if he were there for 10 years, I really don't know. Is it not somewhat misrepresented? The reporting have been misrepresented for such a long time.
So he was in the bishop's house for, I think it was purchased in 2017 or 18. However, you are correct, it has been misrepresented, along with a number of other things that we are discovering in our budgets. And we have been making these discoveries since February of last year, or of this year, I suppose. And I shared that at convention, that we were starting to make discoveries around places where our information was not quite accurate. We continue to make those discoveries in a variety of areas. So we've shared them as we found them. This is one of the areas. Again, I believe this ties to how the financial work that was being done in the areas where things were being placed off budget. I don't believe that it was intentional malfeasance on the part of Bishop Stokes at all. It was a normal part of compensation. The issue was not that he had the house and was compensated and given pension around that, the value of that. The issue was that the same was not extended to me.
And that's fine. I mean, you need to present at your ref, but I think there's the auditing, there's a lot of incompetencies in terms of the auditing though.
No, the audits are being done now. They weren't done before. So we've completed the 2020 2019 audit. The 2020 and 2021 audits are currently with the auditors. We expect to get at least a draft of their completed review before convention. My hope is that we might even have it ready to be signed, sealed, and delivered. 2022 and 2023 are being worked on right now. We had essentially for 2020 and 2021 and into 2022, we had letters, invoices, files not completed. We had transactions in our system that were not tied to, you know, we'd have a check written, but we wouldn't have it referenced to the invoice that it was supposed to pay. So we've had to do all that work of reconstruction. The work has gone forward. We're not seeing any spending outside of church spending, like we didn't fund anyone's, you know, round the world yacht cruise. But we are seeing that there were things in our budget or in our spending that were not adequately reflected in our budget. And we're seeing, and that's why we have, you know, values of certain accounts are below where they should be. We can trace all the money. We just have to do the full work of reconstruction, following accredited or auditing principles and working with the auditors and with the audit committee.
And do you suspect that this audit will be done before the next convention, which is in November, a couple of weeks?
So as I said, we've already completed and signed off on the 2019 audit.
Okay.
The 2020 and 2021 audits are with the auditors, the professional audit firm in Princeton, and then we expect them to give us at least a, if not a preliminary report. We expect something to be, we expect to be very close to completion. My hope is that 2020 and 2021 are done for convention in late November, and 2022 and 2023, we expect them to be done early in the new year because first of all, as soon as we discovered what wasn't being done, we took steps to correct it, but there's only, you know, you can correct going forward, but you have to do reconstruction going backward, and we're still doing the reconstruction. 2022 and 2023 are closer to recent memory, so it is not quite as difficult to trace things. Again, 2020 and 2021 are with the auditors right now, so most of the work there is done. 2022 and 2023, we continue to assemble the materials, but we are on track for that. So my hope is that within 1 calendar year of me telling the diocese we had 5 overdue audits, we will be down to a normal audit process. It has been an incredible amount of work. Our finance team has done heroic work. Our audit subcommittee, the committee that does the audits, has been just incredible in the work they have done there. We're doing it faithfully and thoroughly and well. We're not trying to hide anything from you. We are in a process of basically having to reconstruct financial reports from sort of the equivalent of a dumpster full of papers. I can't put it any more clearly. It's just.
Bishop Friend, thank you. But I mean, there's still a lot of gray areas that, I mean, I could explore, but I leave it up to you, and hopefully at the convention, there might be a clearer picture, but there's still a lot of questions that but I don't think I need to consume the meeting with any more than you know. Thank
I
you.
appreciate your care for the diocese. I know you're asking these questions because you love your church and you love your diocese and you want things to be right. I do too. We're not trying to hide anything. It's been quite a year. It feels like
there's no doubt.
Yeah. Every year we've had every month, we've had some kind of financial recognition that was not there before. So we're heading in the right direction, but we are not there yet, but we are many steps closer to financial health than we were in March. And I am absolutely certain that we are moving where we should be at this time. And I'm very grateful to our treasurer and our chair of the audit committee and others.
And I thank you.
Yeah, I would say going forward, that's one of the reasons we're starting here and the other reports to make sure our reports accurately reflect where the money is spent, where it's coming in from. As Bishop Friend said, it wasn't like it was moved and illegally done. It was just some money was spent in this area that should have been spent over there. It should have showed up in another report. it didn't show up correctly in the right report. So we're working with the processes going forward to make sure that the expenses accurately reflect what we're actually spending it on. And that's why that's in this budget where you're seeing those changes come into place in a couple of areas. Going down to the next area, the canon of the ordinary. Again, this is one of those we looked at the increase from 2024 to 2025. It would be 2.5%. This second line is a $20,000 potential adjustment. As Richard French said, we're looking at again market level compensation in that area. Waiting on the final numbers in there, but when we did this budget put together last week for a presentation last week, we did we are allocating for another $20,000 for potential market adjustment. So again, when we revise this budget over the next week or two, we'll actually show that being probably part of salary and housing when we get the actual number that it will be in there. So we'll put that in there. But to help us come with a more realistic budget numbers, we did put in $20,000 that we may be additional salary for the candidate of the ordinary in that particular area. So the total compensation number we have here of $135,858, that'll probably stay the same though. Exactly how that's done between the first three lines, we'll see if there's any adjustment required in those areas to cover that, any adjustments in salary in that place. Going down to other staffing areas, there's no budget for chief operating officer this year. We are bringing back the chief financial officer. A few weeks ago, Bishop French announced that Sarah Page will be taking over at the title of chief financial officer for the diocese. She's heading up our financial team now. The pay we had originally budget was for the same as canon of the ordinary, and we're also looking in that position whether or not there would be any market adjustments required. And we also have budget for continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation. So that 139,608 number for chief financial officer, we anticipate that bottom line will stay the same, but again, based on market, stay the same or maybe slightly less. But again, that $20,000 number, that may go over to the salary line once we get final figures on market adjustments for that position based on what payments are, what the cost of that position is in other neighboring dioceses. And we hope to have that within the next week or two, that final number. Other areas, transition ministry officer, this is a part-time position. That one's just carrying through with the state, a straight 2.5% increase. What we also have done is you'll see in continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation, we've got budgets in there for staff positions, especially the lay staff positions, to allow them some budget in that area where in the past we hadn't had much budgeted for those in the area of continuing education. Canon for congregations, again, this is a position we had budgeted in 2024, but we just had a new hire in that area, just started, I believe, last Tuesday. For 2025, we're budgeting $90,000 for that position for canon for congregations. That is in line with compensation for similar positions in other dioceses. One thing in this particular area is that the person holding that position will be sharing the role as a rector at another congregation, and that congregation will be contributing $25,000 towards a $90,000 salary. So we'll see the actual cost in the diocesan budget reduced by $25,000 because they'll be have a part-time role supporting one of our other congregations in the diocese. Other area is canon for Hispanic ministry. The budget there line item is $100,000. As we mentioned last year, we made adjustments in some of the other canon salaries. That position was slightly over what the market condition was, so we agreed not to pass on the cost of living increase until the other positions caught up with that $100,000 number, other than reducing their salary for that particular staff person. The other changes in this area is we've had some changes in the professional allowance, continuing education and transportation. to put these more online with what the other staff members are getting. That one had a much larger professional allowance amount, even though it wasn't being spent. We did have a budget of close to 10,000 for continuing education in that area. So the adjustment's been made not to budget that up with that larger number. Next one is Canon for Formation Vocations. That position did start in February 2024, just a straight 2.5% increase for the salary and housing number, and also equitable adjustments in the continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation on line with other similar positions in the DICE. Next one is a part-time missioner for lifelong Christian formation, just a 2.5% increase in that area, and a small continuing education and transportation budget for that position. Missioner for youth and young adults, again, 2.5% increase, and allowance for continuing education or transportation. One, it was budgeted at $3,500 in years past, moved back down to $1,000, be online with transportation budgets for other staff positions. Canon for Black Ministries, we have someone currently in that position, but the plan is to hire a new Canon for Black Ministries in 2025 at the $90,000 level. We don't have anyone in that position now, so we'll offer it at the $90,000 level for 2025 and provide the same level of continuing education, professional allowance, and transportation as the other positions. Going down, you'll see we had budgeted last year a missioner for evangelism and social media. We won't have that position this year. This is part of the change in the communications budget. No longer will we have that $82,000 cost for a missioner for evangelism and social media. That position won't carry forward into 2025. And we had anticipated bringing in a part-time position, missioner for communications and technology. Again, that position won't carry forward into 2025. So that and part of the funds that we're going to use on that missioner for communications technology is some of that extra money that we planned in the Diocese Communication budget to bring in consultants or technical specialists to help us with some of the communication technology.
Thank you, Jonathan. If I could just very quickly go back to the Missioner for Black Ministries, that position was not listed here. That is one of the positions we do actually intend to have that quarter time opportunity available to support our historically Black congregations. So that number will return to the budget with the next iteration of it. Again, we were trying to do some tidying up, but we were not intending to remove positions that we know will be a real support to our ministries. So just to be aware of that. I know Ken and Annette is probably wondering about that one. It's certainly something that
I was going to go back and say, The other one, the Canon for Congregational Development and Mission, that position doesn't carry forward. The Canon for Congregations that I mentioned earlier is going to be taking over that role. So that's why there's no budget line item in the budget for 2025 in there, is that the title's been changed slightly. This next budget line item, Missioner for Emerging Ministries, this is one of those that in the past had been, again, off the budget. We're actually collecting expenses for that in 2024, but in 2025, we're going to have a budget that currently function is being held by the Canon for the Missioner for Haitian Ministries. The title is going to be enlarged to be the Missioner for Emerging Ministries, so it can support any emerging ministries that we have throughout the diocese. That person will support it, and we're showing that in our 2025 budget, the actual cost for that position in the 2025 budget in there. So that's an addition that wasn't in the budget last year, but we are putting in the budget this year. Some of the costs for that were covered again through one of our other funds, but we've decided to put that in the actual operating budget again to show what the actual expenses are related to that particular ministry. Other area, if we look at administrative staff budget, you can see that it's decreased from 430,000 to 355. Some of that again is due to changes in staff positions, some of the administrative support staff positions. We've changed one of the positions in the financial staff is going to be reduced, and some of the consultant costs in the financial area to support the audits will be reduced. That's some of the part-time support we brought in to help with audits is going to be reduced. So we're looking at a reduction in our total administrative staff budget down to 355,171 in 2025. The areas of next area around insurance, health insurance, you'll see some increases in that area. That again reflects changes in the staff mix. Also checks the budget reflects what's actually the costs are related to staff versus having budgeting for insurance for single folks, where if the staff needs family, we're going to have a budget for insurance for a family or family and one other. We're making sure of at least existing staff that we're budgeting accurately what their insurance costs may be in that area. So that's why we're seeing some increase in the health insurance budget for 2025 versus 2024. And the same is for dental, a slight increase in that area. Our pension cost, with all the changes going through, the pension cost will be slightly less, but when we do our final adjustments on the salary numbers, we'll get a more accurate reflection on what the pension cost will be. So I do expect to see some slight changes in the pension costs as we go in and make those market adjustments in those salaries I talked about earlier. Another area in the finance area, insurance bonding budget, the same. We actually have auditing costs and project continuing auditing support going into next year. As Bishop French mentioned, even if we finish the 2020 and 2021 audits this year, we have 2022 and 2023 audits to be done next year, and at least a start on the 2024 audit by the end of next year. Our plan is to get much more up to date on the timeline for audits. Line 702, legal support. Our actual expenditures have tended to go higher year to year based on Title IV actions. Originally, we've been budgeting out for $5,000 a year. Budget and Finance decided to raise that to at least $10,000, but we're hoping that some of the Title IV legal costs will go down. There's been a change in the canons into what the diocese is obligated to provide to basically the defendants in Title IV cases, so that we're hoping that in the future years, we won't have as much expenditures in terms of legal costs, but we definitely looked at Budget and Finance that probably going to be more than that $5,000 number, so we budgeted in $10,000. In this last area of facilities, slight decrease in property maintenance, again based on actual costs. The main area change here is our telephone cost. We're projecting an increase in that level. Again, this is reflecting what the actual increases in telephone costs are in 2024. A lot of that's due to some overlapping in our telephone providers in that area. The other area of changes around facilities are an increase in our IT maintenance and support, a slight increase from that $60,000 number to 67 in 2025. Again, this is transitioning between our IT support contractors as we transition from one to another. We're seeing some overlapping costs in that area, but we hope that will be leveled out going into 2025. So we're projecting about a $7,000 increase in that area. Leased equipment, we had some updates in our leases, so we're expecting that the 2025 budget will be less will be needed in 2025 than 2024. The other area of increase, though, and this is a significant one, is our computer software and supplies. Significant increase in the subscription amounts we pay for our software, primarily our accounting software. One of the things as we went through our accounting processes, we learned that the reporting features in the existing accounting system weren't adequate enough for us to properly break down all the costs so we can track them accurately. So we did have an upgrade in that area, and that does result into additional costs for our computer software and supplies. So based on expenditures we're seeing in 2024, we have decided to increase that budget quite a bit going into 2025. Again, the benefit is that we can now get more accurate and detailed reporting on our finances, given that we've got more capable functions within the accounting system.
I'm
Other
just
areas
make
are
one-
clergy.
Can
widows
I
and
make one
orphans,
very
children.
quick comment
Yeah,
about the software thing? We have not needed the same level of software in the past, and we have not been as financially accountable and responsible. So spending that money allows the staff, it equips us to do the work that we actually have to do. It's not that our costs have gone up, it's that our costs were probably artificially low before. So as we do this work, that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and the other areas, these are the widow, retired clergy, widows, orphans, health insurance, and distribute other funds budget in 2025 is the same as before. So basically, in 2025, our expense budget was $3,901,076. Going back up to the top, that's how we got with that drawdown from the trustee fund. Sorry about the scrolling. This number 419,204, it basically was the difference between the income lines in these first three income lines and what the amount needed to fully balance our budget. So 419,204 is a number. And looking at potential changes once we tweak the budgets, we don't expect it to go too much over that number. We're hoping to keep it around the same, even though we make those tweaks in the budget, that number of the drawdown for trustee grants to be around that 420 or 425 number once we make some other adjustments to the budget over the next week. And then we'll post those changes out. We'll go back to Diocesan Council for approval, and then we'll post those back out. So if anyone has any questions on the changes, you can see that definitely well prior to convention in November.
Thank you very much. My hope is that we can get that drawdown to be below 400, and I've got a couple of ways we might be able to do that. Given that the current year's drawdown is 735,000, I think that's a substantial change, and the previous year was well over $1 million. We are moving the budget in a direction of being a little bit more balanced, and we're getting a bit more accountability and awareness of our numbers. I'd welcome any questions people might have either on specific things or on the overall pattern at this time.
Bishop French, I don't have a question. It's Jeff Kirk. I'd like to just compliment you and your staff for a lot of work here that you hadn't anticipated. I don't think we had anticipated either. And that's not to point fingers at anybody. It's just to say you had a lot to deal with. I think you're doing it very nicely. You've got some good people to help you. I want to help you when I can. And I think that, there are just a lot of things that we don't know as much about as we'd like to, I think, at this point. But thank you very much for all you're doing.
Thank you very much, Father. I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate the support and the work that you do in various areas to keep our common life moving in the right direction. It has been a remarkable year. I'm so overwhelmed with gratitude for the work of the staff team, our treasurer, our chancellor, the Canon Paul Wolfgang, who's both trustees and standing committee and the chair of the audit committee. We have some great people who really care and are working hard to make a difference in the life of the diocese. And it's great to see. If we could go back briefly to the topic of the Board of Missions, Canon Annette, I actually have the numbers for you. I can give you a little bit more information, and we'll share the numbers sometime this week publicly with the diocese. But a couple of things. First, the number for 2024 was 439,000, so we are recommending 375. That is a reduction of about 15%. It's not even 20%. It's less of a substantial change than we had initially thought. The other thing is that when I look at the pattern, I'm remembering a couple of the conversations we had with the Board of Missions. In some instances, requests for support were not met with a commitment of funding, because the congregations indicated that the reasons they needed the support were so that they did not have to draw down their own trust funds and reserves. because the diocese is already drawing down trust funds and reserves to do this work, it did not seem appropriate at this time for us to further withdraw ours in order to enable a congregation to not have to withdraw theirs at this point in time. So that helped us to make some of the decisions a little more easily than we might have. The final thing I would say is that in a couple of instances, we know that there's been a bit of a cost in every congregation had to carry a little bit of the decrease, but we are hopeful that actually the staffing changes and the extension of staff support will help to offset that in some substantial ways. So it's not that, and in some instances, the cost of the decrease is $250 or so. It's not that congregations are going to be struggling under a large burden, but the number of congregations we support is such that it allows us to, if we share it a little bit, there's, there are 18 congregations that requested, that are on our list for support, and I think we provided funding for 15 or 16 of them. As I look at the list, I don't really see anywhere that is going to be harmed by the reduction in any substantial way. We know our most vulnerable congregations, and we know where we have an obligation and a need to continue support at higher levels. And as I said, some of the congregations actually requested less money rather than continuation. So I don't think it's quite as much of a shock as it might appear if you look at the 375 number in the budget, but we will get this information out to the whole diocese sometime in the next week so people can have a look, and also so our congregations know in advance rather than finding out at convention what their funding might be. We know that they need that information as well. Are there any further questions?
I have one question and one comment. My question is, and you may have covered this when you talked about increase in audit costs, but I'm just wondering how much all this extra auditing that's being done now is going to cost in the long run. It would seem to me pretty substantial number.
It's currently, it's actually a lot of the cost is not in the audits themselves, it's the cost of an audit. We have to do 5 instead of 1, so there is a little bit of a backlog there. The bigger number is actually in the additional work that has to be done.
Right.
Some of that is just in staff time. One of the reasons I'm really committed to making sure that our chief financial officer is compensated at a rate that is not 20,000, or currently it's 30,000 below the rate in Newark, which is a close comparison, is because of the amount of work that she and members of her staff team are doing. I mean, it really is extraordinary, the commitment and the faithfulness there. We're also really trying hard not to burn people out, but we work with several other consultants, including, there's a company called yourparttimecontroller.com, and Michael from yourparttimecontroller.com has been working with us for a number of years. We've had more hours for him this year than otherwise because of everything. He's the primary person doing some of the background stuff, and it can be done online in our systems. And as well, we've got Manny Strauss is back with us. He's part-time hourly. He was the staff accountant for many years, but he's working in a slightly different way at this time. So the way we've been able to compensate those folks and the way that those costs are covered is actually in the administrative cost staff line. Some of it is it'll be hard to parse out what is specifically audit, what is financial cleanup, and what is staff transition. All three have an impact, but we will have it it's in the current budget. That's where you can see the spending, and in the future budget, we have space in that line actually for additional staff. Once the dust has settled and we know what we need, we will be looking at bringing on an additional staff person to ensure that we have the support we need on the ground. But we've also been blessed with great people who are readily available and doing the work in a contract way. I realize that's not quite an answer. We don't have a dollar value for it. And it isn't, I would name it in 3 different areas. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to parse out whether it was audit work or putting us on the right financial path or something else. But we also have, because of staff transition in the finance team, grace of God, we're not spending what we thought we might. So.
Well, thank you. That was very helpful, actually. And I also just wanted to say that I commend you for your forthright, your your transparency in what you've been doing, and certainly thanks to all of your staff that has helped you get through all this. I know it's been very difficult.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to pass along to my staff the sense that the diocese is grateful for their work. And I know that that will be very meaningful for them because they've been doing a fabulous job and they've been working really hard. And it really feels like we are, by the grace of God, moving in the direction we need to be moving in. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Jonathan, if you don't mind stopping the screen share, I'm happy to offer a closing prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
For you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you great thanks for the many blessings you have entrusted to us here in the Diocese of New Jersey. We thank you for congregations, clergy, and lay leaders who seek to fulfill your mission and make a difference in the lives of the church family and the world around. We pray, Lord, that the work we have done, that the resources you have entrusted to us is pleasing to you, and we pray that you will continue to bless us and strengthen us for loving service. As we go from this meeting, we pray your blessing upon us in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 I could just ask Deacon Clive Sang to give us a dismissal and send us on our way at the end of our conversation.
Good job.
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks.
Thanks
Steve.
to God.
God.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Good job.